Hey, besties. How's it going? How's it going? Hey, Missa. Hello, hello, hello. Not sure who else is in the live, but I said happy Monday, and it's definitely Tuesday, so that's awkward. I'm going to type that again. Happy Tuesday. Um, Hold on. Very good. Okay. I'm here to just do a little talking. Didn't come on live yesterday because yesterday was my day off from my regular job. So I thought I would just take a day off from thinking in general. And that's what I did. I went to the gym. I changed my sheets on my bed, watched Grey's Anatomy, and went to bed. So still tired, but feeling better than last time I came on here and spoke. Hey, Sherry. Yeah, never know what day it is anymore either. Last time we chatted was last Thursday, I think, and I just came on to talk about election things and just processing. And I have done more processing since then. One thing I want to address before I get into the astrology of the week is a lot of the diviners and astrologers and people who are speaking on the election process not being over. I kind of talked about this last time, but it's still in my mind that I think it's very important to consider what it would mean for that lady to somehow become the president for the next 4 years specifically, after what we know and what has transpired so far. I just think people are maybe speaking about it in a way that that's a good thing or a better thing for us, and I just don't know if that's entirely true. So, not saying that it is or it isn't or wouldn't be better or worse, I don't know. I'm just saying I think we should really consider what that would actually mean for all of us and for people all around the world. Like, is that really as is the grass really greener on the other side is my question. So I might circle back to that, but I want to make sure I actually talk to you guys about the astrology of the week first. So let's get into that. Um, so far, all that we've really had is the moon in Pisces since I didn't come on live yesterday. So the moon is in Pisces currently. Today, Mercury is square Saturn, and that square is happening at 18 degrees Scorpio and 18 degrees Aquarius for Mercury and Saturn, respectively. So, dealing with that square, kind of interesting. It's happening in fixed signs. Fixed signs deal with identity and self preservation. Mercury has officially entered its retrograde shadow, and Saturn is basically stationary direct for the rest of the week. So that's going on. Another thing going on. Let me see. Another thing going on. The moon will enter Aries on Wednesday, and then Friday is a big day. Friday we have Saturn officially stationary direct. We have the full moon in Aries, and the moon will enter Taurus shortly after that because the full moon is at 29 degrees Aries, and the sun enters Scorpio. So really everything happening this week leads up to Friday. And then Friday carries us into next week where um next week is kind of low key, honestly. We just get the first of 3 oppositions between Mercury and Jupiter. So, definitely firmly in Mercury retrograde season at this point. Saturn is direct and the full moon in Aries. Those are our main full moon in Aries and the sun in Scorpio. Those are our main transits coming up. So, Mercury square Saturn, some of that feels like what we're talking about, what we're communicating, and what we're trying to express about ourselves is in conflict with some aspect of reality. Reality in the sense of imagined or conceptual reality. And because it's between Scorpio and Aquarius, I think what people are saying about how they feel, what they're experiencing emotionally, how they present, how they appear to other people, all of those different things and the conversations around that are in some kind of conflict with um with maybe what we imagine reality is right now, what we think is reality right now, what we think is real, what we're seeing in some cases, and how we think. So how we think is in conflict with how we feel. In this particular square, it's not so cut and dry that Scorpio placements have the upper hand. Normally, Scorpio, just as a sign, does tend to dominate or impose itself on Aquarius. But because Saturn is in Aquarius, there are some ways that Saturn is very heavily resisting embodied emotions at this time. And that can manifest a number of different ways. Something I'm immediately thinking about with that square is this idea of fear mongering, ironically enough. And what does fear mongering actually mean? Depends on who you ask. How I'm thinking about it is maybe the embodied experience that we're having, depending on the person, depending on the context, the embodied experience that you're having somehow is either, well, it is in conflict with maybe what we see happening around us or what we are experiencing in an objective sense, if it's possible. So maybe finding it just harder to objectify the experience that we're having, finding it harder to see the maybe finding it harder to see alternative perspectives, um, finding it more difficult to internalize something other than our own narrative. So I might have more to say about that later. I'm going to stick a pin in that and come back to it. In the same vein of talking about what Saturn and Mercury are doing, but also just what Saturn is doing in general, Saturn is stationary. So it's paused in the sky. And when planets pause in the sky, it's basically the same thing as like a semi crashing on the freeway and how it stops traffic and how it makes everybody have to kind of reroute and go a different way. I think we use that analogy a lot on this side of the astrological spectrum. But a very literal example of that is right outside of my apartment. They've been doing construction on that entire street basically all week. And it has involved a lot of big, heavy machinery. They've completely ripped up the road and repaved it. They've done it pretty quickly, though, I will say. But yeah, kind of how retrogrades work. So I think the election, the US election itself, is a big part of Saturn's stationary because it is the thing that has kind of derailed a lot of us. It has um, thrown a wrench in what we previously perceived to be reality. I know I experienced it that way personally. I'm curious if the rest of you have also experienced it that way. But it was a big, like, we've basically entered another reality. And I don't mean that in the esoteric way. I mean that very much in the um whenever you're coming up on like a crossroad or a forked road rather, and there's an outcome that would be possible if we were to go this way, and then there's the outcome that's possible if you go this way. And we were for a while in this kind of which road are we going to choose pause, which I think was direct, or was the stationary period itself, is deciding which route are we going to take, which route are we about to go down, and then having the election more or less confirmed but not yet certified says that, okay, this is the road that we're going down. And to me, regardless of what happens from this point forward, as a result of the election, all of that was going to be on this path regardless. So whenever I say that, like, people have different predictions, myself included, I mean, I don't necessarily have a prediction, but I'm in more of the I wouldn't be surprised if camp where, maybe the election doesn't get certified. Maybe they find out fraud. Maybe Trump gets charged with something. Maybe Elon gets charged with something, whatever. But all of those things exist on this particular road that we have chosen to go down, whether that's chosen by the universe or chosen as a democracy or whatever it is. All of those things exist in this realm of possibilities and in this particular reality that we've now entered. And so, knowing that that is happening while Saturn is stationary in Aquarius specifically, does beg the question, okay, if we're dealing with themes around self-determination and self-concept and also erasure and dismissiveness and dissociation and all of those topics, liberation and revolution included. I know a lot of people have associated that with Aquarius. It's like, um what are the past and present experiences that would lead to some kind of large liberation event, whether that's, far down the line or within the next few years, who knows? But basically, all of the current circumstances that we're dealing with are setting us up for things that will eventually happen in the future. But right now, the way that we interact with reality has shifted, and therefore, the way that we think about our current reality, our circumstances, and ourselves has also shifted. Um, I know for me, I can feel how this is kind of trying to snap me out of some level of dissociation. And it's very much the case that me having Saturn in Aquarius, despite having two Scorpio placements being Venus and Jupiter, trying to impose itself and say, hey, you in danger. You're in danger, buddy. There's still a part of me that's like in denial about that. Saturn often represents denial. Just because of the way I think human brains process big information. Sometimes you just got to hang out in the denial space. Sometimes you got to go through all those stages of grief. And I think that's where I'm at right now. And every so often, I will hear something either in the news, on Twitter, whatever, directly from Trump himself or any number of his right wing affiliates that will kind of try to snap me out of the dissociation from the Scorpio perspective of, hey, you are a black trans man in Texas. Texas is one of the least safe places for trans people to live. You need to engage with reality as if you are in danger, because if you don't, bad things might happen. That's kind of how I feel about how that square is manifesting for me. But in reality, I just kind of feel like I don't know how I'm going to get out. How I don't know how any of those things are going to happen. And it makes it hard to not get overwhelmed with the feelings of anxiety and distress and um what's it called? Anxiety, distress, and despair, which can also be Scorpio, right? All of these uncomfortable feelings. It's hard for me to be mobilized by those feelings to actually like deal with reality as it exists. So in a lot of ways, I'm using my mind and the power of perception to kind of think myself out of those feelings. But at the end of the day, the feelings are still there. They're real. And so I think this is happening to us on a collective level to some extent on both sides of the aisle. I do think there are some people who voted for Trump who are kind of realizing like, oh, some of these things are not what I thought that they were, but these things maybe don't affect me, so it's not that big of a deal, right? Or like, yeah, all of that other stuff, but I voted for him for these reasons and I kind of don't really care about this other stuff. Or people who are like, no, we absolutely don't want anybody of a marginalized identity to exist and they should be extinguished and we don't care how that happens. It just needs to happen. So I'm trying to look at transits moving forward from both perspectives, not just perspectives of people on the left or far left, but or rather people on the progressive left versus people on the far right, trying to see the astrology through both sides of those two conflicting narratives, but with the perspective that people on the right are now the people with all the power. So we are living in the astrology of that perspective, basically. So does that kind of make sense as far as what Saturn is doing and how these squares to Saturn, not just now, but like the sun is going to square Saturn. Um, who's left? Oh, I think it's just the sun left that's going to have a square with Saturn because Venus has already moved on. Jupiter is where it is. And um, Mars is still in Cancer. Do we have another Jupiter square? I can't remember if I saw that or not. another Jupiter in Taurus square Saturn, like retrograde, or Jupiter retrograde square Saturn. I don't think we have another one, but let me just double check. Um, no, where'd it go? Yes, we do have another. I knew we did. We do have another Jupiter Saturn square that will be on December 24th. So, but that's between Taurus and Aquarius. So that looks kind of ominous after knowing the outcome of the election, but there's still much more astrology to be had. I would basically say the same thing for Sun and Scorpio. I think maybe the feeling of threat or threat perception being more conscious whenever the Sun moves into Scorpio, like there's a bit of being dropped back into a conscious awareness of what's going on for us emotionally and internally with that placement, and more awareness of what is threatening to your life or body, as far as like, yes, bodily autonomy, but also bodily preservation, self-preservation, emotional preservation. And knowing that these Scorpio transits are ruled by Mars and Cancer, um really understanding what Mars and Cancer is doing, especially as it's slowing down to station retrograde as well. December 6th, Mars will station retrograde. I think it's important to really hone in on what Mars and Cancer is doing. And to me, Mars and Cancer is using the body, feelings, and emotions as cues to take action for towards relief as quickly as possible, which means whatever it is that we're reaching for relief doesn't necessarily have to have like long-term sustainable benefit. It can just be like a quick hit of dopamine, right? To give us that release or that relief. It can be a short-term immediate solution to issues that are maybe long and ongoing. But the goal of Cancer is not necessarily being sustainable. To me, that's more of a Capricorn thing. Cancer is more about responding immediately to a need by kind of any means necessary whenever Mars is involved, I think. So that being said, it makes me wonder, like, how will we respond to perceived threats while planets are in Scorpio? How will we respond to threatening conversations or conversations that feel like they're antagonistic to who we are, as people, as individuals? And I mean this on the interpersonal level too, like dealing with conflict, dealing with a difference of feeling or difference of opinions, and the way that ideas and other people's feelings can feel threatening to us, mainly because of the threat of separation, like relational separation. Um, so yeah, that's where I feel like we're at currently. What else do I have to say about that? Oh, I guess there's also the full moon in Aries. I would add the full moon in Aries to this idea because it's still Mars ruled. Like this week is very Mars dominant. And Aries, especially like where I see Cancer as immediate relief, I feel like Aries has more of this like sense of urgency to it that isn't necessarily about relief so much as it is about taking the action itself. I mean, really leaning into the Mars aspect of what is in my control, what is in my power, what can I do? I need to do something quickly. I need to do something soon because if I don't, nobody else will. So, what does it mean then to have the full moon in Aries be square its ruler Mars in Cancer? Um, on its face, I think about the square between Aries and Cancer as, hey, Eric, um, Between Aries and Cancer, I think about Cancer as being the kind of the baby before the baby can walk. So there's a way of kind of really expecting somebody to come save you, come help you, come give you relief in the same way that babies cry so that, a parent or caregiver or whoever will come and help soothe them. But with Aries, we're dealing with more abandonment and we're dealing with uh, personal power and autonomy and responsibility. So there's this aspect between those two that kind of Cancer is resisting this idea that Cancer has to get up and do it themselves because they want somebody else to come and save them and do it for them. Whereas Aries is like, nobody is coming for us. There's nobody else here who cares about us enough to do something, or we've been abandoned long before now, and this is the reality of it. So we're going to have to get up. I see Aries as kind of lighting a fire under Cancer's ass. Oftentimes, the same fire that, allows toddlers to learn how to walk, to take the risk of standing up and learning how to put one foot in front of the other and to move and take action freely without waiting on somebody else to do it for them. So at the same time, because the ruler of Aries itself is in Cancer, it's a little bit of it's a square with reception, to be fair. So I think on the one hand, there is a lot of get up and go and do it yourself. And then there is a lot of kind of wallowing in the anxiety and the fear of it all from the Scorpio perspective as well. The other side of this full moon is the Venus side, where the sun is in Libra, Venus is in Sagittarius, and Jupiter is in Taurus. So on the one hand, we have a Mars heavy sky. On the other hand, we have a Venus heavy sky at the same time. So that kind of leads to Venus in Sagittarius kind of carrying the load. Um, Let me actually look at this on a chart while I'm talking through it. Because there's something about that, like Mars in Cancer has a lot of power, Venus in Sagittarius has a lot of power. Those two signs don't really fuck with each other. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I think we talked about this on a previous live where um the beliefs that we have can sometimes interfere with us meeting our basic needs and getting our basic needs met quickly and as soon as possible without necessarily caring about long-term consequences from the Cancer perspective can get in the way of our larger beliefs and convictions, and values. So those two signs kind of have conflict in that way. But because Cancer is on the kind of Mars individual side and Venus is on the Sagittarius, or Sagittarius rather is on the Venus kind of communal dependence side, that's kind of interesting. I hadn't really thought about that like that until just now. It is kind of like banding together with people who have shared values, banding together with people who see the world and understand it the same way that you do. But also, I think getting really restrictive and having heightened discernment and even like hypervigilance about who does and doesn't belong based on how they think and what they believe. Hey, Netta. So I was kind of just talking about this with a client actually, where there is that's so interesting. We were just talking about that. I wasn't even thinking about these transits, but between Mars and Cancer competing with Venus and Sagittarius right now, it is true that sometimes the immediate need and taking action in a way that meets the immediate need can sometimes be in conflict with our values and our beliefs, our religions, our politics, whatever it is, because the needs of the body kind of supersede the like morality maybe. Well, I won't say they supersede. I'll just say they're at odds with the morality or well, yeah, I guess the morality of the situation or the circumstances or maybe the means of meeting that need. Hmm. And at the same time, Venus is also in a trine with the full moon. So they kind of reinforce each other and they work together. It seems like in favor of individualism, which how things are kind of set up right now, I think that is true. I think, broadly speaking, individualism is one of the big bad wolves, I guess, that we're trying to one of the big beasts that we're trying to dismantle in a long-term arc type of way, because it's so deeply ingrained in all of us in a system that basically pits us against each other and makes us compete for resources. So, if we just talk about the election, a lot of people voted for individualism. A lot of people voted for, I need to be able to afford to live. I need to be able to get my needs met. I need to be able to move freely and do whatever I want and not have to consider other people. A lot of people voted for that. A lot of people voted for the competitiveness of capitalism and this idea that if we give corporations and the wealthy more money, somehow it will trickle down to the rest of us. And that's maybe neither here nor there, but still part of what people still believe in and all came together and voted in favor of. Whereas those of us on the other side are still trying to find ways to be more communal and more compassionate and more, um, or rather less individualistic in how we're trying to move through the world. But at the end of the day, I think, speaking of Jupiter and Taurus, the system and the material culture that we exist in right now does have us having to be more individualistic in how we are obtaining um, safety. So, in terms of needing healthcare, in terms of having to work these corporate jobs, in terms of having to, I don't know, hold more money and food for yourself because you don't have enough to share, and all of those types of things. The consent for individualism has been manufactured by way of our material needs becoming even more, what word am I trying to use? Our material needs being more threatened, our material security being more threatened. So, um, no, that was good. I was thinking that when you said it, yeah. This feels health related to me. Yeah, there's also that. I mean, health obviously a big part of it as well. I think this is true for us as individuals, but it is true for us as the US. The sun is going to be entering the sixth house of the Aries ingress for the US. And the sixth house, of course, has to do with work, but also health and illness and diagnoses and things like that. So, bird flu, obviously, now looming. They're starting to talk about it more, that they can probably pin it on the Trump administration, even though that's definitely a failure of the Biden administration. It's a little bit of both, is the other thing, because some of the things that Trump did and didn't do during his term in office set the stage for things that the Biden administration didn't really do anything about. And then also, now has to have accountability for that because they could have changed some things and didn't. Also, things that they just neglected to do themselves. And now we're here with another Trump presidency. They're going to try to scapegoat Trump. And in general, this kind of a side note, but something I feel like might be important for all of us, this is a personal theory of mine, is remembering that Trump has a Scorpio moon in his chart. So even though he has the sun in Taurus, even though he has Mars rising in Leo, at the end of the day, he has the moon in Scorpio. And therefore, he's kind of a wild card. He's always going to be scapegoated, I think, for whatever happens in the government. And I think Republicans and Democrats alike, since they're basically a uniparty anyway, appreciate that about him and use him for that reason. He's kind of the human shield for all of the destruction of the government in a way. I don't know if that's the right term, actually. I shouldn't say that, but he is the face of whatever the government decides to do moving forward, whether Democrats are involved, whether Republicans are involved, or if it's just him making decisions for himself and his other millionaire and billionaire friends, upper class people. But no matter what, I just think that's something to keep in mind, because the Republicans in general, and specifically the Heritage Foundation, who is the author of um, the authors of the 2025 Project 2025 situation, those people don't necessarily care who the Republican nominee for president was going to be. Just whoever it was going to be a tool for them to pass their stuff. So that doesn't necessarily mean that Trump is 100,000% on board with everything the Heritage Foundation wants to do or everything that even just other Republicans in general want to do. Trump has his own agendas, and he's making these, in my opinion, these are just my speculations. He's trying to make deals, bribes, whatever. He has his own kind of agenda, and he's helping fulfill the agendas of other people on that wing. And I think that's just the branch of government that he felt was going to let him do more of his bullshit and also give him the experience of being a dictator, basically, because whoever they wrote in or whoever was going to get nominated, they want executive power and they want to kind of centralize more executive power for whoever was going to be the president. And Trump just happened to be the guy that they chose, I think, because he, has that attitude about him. Speaking of Mars and Leo in the first house. Hey, Nicolita. Welcome in. Welcome in. Happy Tuesday. Netta says, ironically, I think he'd be the brand. Just like he likes attaching his name to a bunch of things that aren't his for benefits, he's attached his name. Yes, absolutely. The benefit is power. Totally agree. Totally agree. When I say scapegoating him, I mean like him taking it on as the brand, considering Mars is the ruler of his moon. Mars and Leo is the ruler of his moon, makes sense to me. And at the same time, if the public wants to be upset about it, or if the public wants to press against whatever it is, especially whenever it comes to liberals and the Democrats can kind of scapegoat Trump specifically as like the bad guy dictator, second coming of Hitler type of thing, instead of us all acknowledging that, like, no, all of you bitches are in this together. Trump just has his name on it. So for sure. Okay. What was I talking about before I got into that? Oh, hey, Elizabeth. Good to see you. Just talking about politics. um, yeah, because I don't know. I was thinking about it once he got elected. I was like, he does have a Scorpio moon, and like, whenever I listen to, hey Priya, whenever something I'm trying to do, this was something else I wanted to talk about. Something else that I'm trying to do more of moving forward, knowing that 2025 and beyond to an extent, but especially 2025 is a lot of gaslighting and a lot of mutable placements. Remember, we'll have Saturn in Pisces, Jupiter in Gemini, and then Mars will be in Virgo for how long Mars usually transits, probably 6 to 8 weeks next year. The one thing I think we should all be very cognizant of with Saturn and Pisces is this thing I think about as like emotional dog whistles. And that's where somebody can say something, say a word, say a phrase, whatever it is, and then it impacts us on an emotional level to where like critical thinking shuts off. And now we're all just having emotional response. Now, emotional response is not a bad thing. I don't mean to demonize that. Because there's that cue exists for a reason. There is like danger associated with certain things. But in this case, I'm talking about just like anything that Republicans are doing, since I know most of you are on the left with me, anything that Republicans are doing, anything we hear them say just because they're Republicans, we're automatically going to be like, no, this is bad, this is wrong, all of it's wrong. And it's like, okay, to be as objective as possible, we have to see, and this might be the Jupiter and Gemini of it all, we have to actually see and listen to what they're saying without our personal bias on it so that we can work with it in an objective way, especially for people who are lawyers, for people who are, the few liberals who are still left in Congress, and people who are just on the left trying to make sense of things and organize in any kind of significant way. So one example of this for me is like actually reading more about 2025 just as it exists, as it's objectively written without my, left-wing bias on it, just to see what does it say? What are they actually saying? And then trying to read between the lines, not from my perspective, but from their perspective of what all of this means to them based on their beliefs and their ideologies and their goals and their agendas. Because if we just keep looking at things from the liberal perspective or the leftist perspective, all of that's going to look one way that's probably different from the reality of what it is that we're doing. And that can just get very confusing, and it can make all of us struggle to actually be on the same page about what we're fighting against. You see what I mean? So I want to know more about just what concrete legislation they are trying to pass, especially in this first year, and to see it for what it is. And then, even in some ways, like, how can that be used against them? Like, how can that be used if some other people were to assume power, even though we're trying to dismantle the system and all of those types of things? The system itself, especially with the strength that it has right now, is not just going to go away. So for the people who are working within the system, how can they basically Libra strategize using these laws, these executive orders, whatever he's going to pass, in a way that actually could work against them to some extent, at least to buy us more time, or to, like, kind of put out smaller fires along the way or something like that. So going back to this whole like Mars and Cancer, immediate strategy, immediate response type of thing that maybe goes against our politics, that was one thing that I was thinking about. Just getting more educated on what the other side is planning and doing, instead of just talking to more people on the left and our own kind of bias shaping what we perceive is going on around us. I think that'll be really important. So yeah, I want to research more about Project 2025. I want to look more into whatever executive order Trump passes. And a lot of this is also self-preserving as well, because we need to know exactly what it is that we're up against so that we know how to go around it or evade it, or advocate for ourselves, or suggest that something is like unconstitutional or whatever it is, even though their whole plan is to kind of throw all of that stuff out. So yeah, keeping that in mind. Definitely got to watch out for that confirmation bias. We are more vulnerable to misinformation than ever before. Absolutely. And that includes the things that we say to each other. And this is not to say that, like, oh, it's not all bad. Like, it's not, I don't think we need to go so far in the Gemini direction that we now become gullible and naive. It's just a matter of, like I said, being as objective as possible when interpreting legislation specifically, so that we're not spreading rumors, and so that we're also not like arguing with people who disagree with us on things that maybe are not actually true. One example of this for me personally has been investigating more, like, where are these conspiracies even coming from for the right in the first place? And one of them, obviously, as a trans person, that I've looked into is this whole, like, we're going to ban transgender and gender affirming care for minors or for children. Because I was under the impression that that wasn't happening at all. And from what I've seen so far, for the most part, children under 12 are not receiving any kind of gender affirming care in the medical sense, because basically, like, before puberty, there's really nothing to do. And there's no reason to do, well, one, it's just not I think it's just not legal, but it's also like a consent issue. You know, children can't really consent, parents have to do it for them, and all this other kind of stuff. So if there were any kind of gender affirming care surgeries going on for children under 12, it would likely be related to intersex children, or children who have underlying medical conditions that would require them to have some type of surgery. It doesn't have anything to do with being transgender as much as it does just body stuff. So that's one part. The other part is children, you could say 12 to 18, but specifically this like 15 to 17 range. That would be where most gender affirming surgeries are happening. In very, very small case by case, rare instances. So there's plenty of information on that if you want to look into it. But that is, I think, more what they're targeting, is like teenagers basically getting top surgery or other kinds of surgeries. The other nuance to this that I found out was that most of the time for trans kids, they get on puberty blockers around the time that puberty starts. And so puberty blockers just pause or delay puberty. There's also children who have what's called precocious puberty, where they start having puberty and developing different secondary sex characteristics and fertility and all that type of stuff like really young. And so puberty blockers helps to delay that process for them. Cis children, same thing. Just as a medical intervention. And for gender affirming care, usually chest surgery is the main one that they would do. And a lot of times that's for cishet boys. So teen boys who experience what's called gynecomastia, where you have extra breast tissue. So it gives the appearance of having breasts on teenage boys who probably don't want that, because they do identify as male, getting that removed. And then the very few numbers, few and far between, would be trans-identified teenagers who, through multiple consultations, multiple conversations with doctors, with therapists, with parents, with like a lot of people involved, like it takes a lot to get to the point where teenagers are having gender affirming surgeries. So there's a lot of nuance there. And obviously, like, if we on the left are just running around saying kind of how I was, that like children aren't having gender affirming surgeries, whatever, and then you find out all of these things, that's just going to come off as a lie to basically anybody, when it's like, okay, the reality is this is what's actually happening. And it still matters regardless that children have autonomy and the ability to self-determine, right? So there's that. And then bans would then create a situation where children don't have medical autonomy, as Jim is saying in the chat, where children don't have medical autonomy. And the other part of that is that, starting with trans rights is just a way to, again, manufacture consent so that they can do things that end up affecting cis people as well. Like, again, trans people just being the scapegoats. So, and in general, like, children having autonomy is something that especially the fundamentalist and Christian right doesn't want. Children are not meant to have autonomy and think for themselves, because then they're harder to control. So there's that, right? Just as an example of these things. So I say all of this to say, again, like, whenever we are entering these debates or having conversations, especially with people on the right, if these are people in your family, people who are friends or were friends or coworkers or whoever it is, if you do dare to enter into conversations and debates with them, coming at it from a more level-headed perspective where you're just objectively speaking the facts is going to go over better than getting into this whole like ideological battle, because at the end of the day, they are on what they think is a more rational, objective, whatever, just leave it up to the states kind of idea and take the government out of it perspective, when the reality is there are still issues with that. They may be framing it as leaving it up to the states, but there's more to it than just that. So I won't speak too much on that aspect of it because I still need to look into all of that. But from what I've learned so far, what I'm hearing so far is that a lot of that is kind of a deflection, like going back to the traditional Republican idea that the government should have less control, less interference, and we should leave it up to the states. And then how that kind of just introduces even more fuckery, basically, as well as the larger federal laws and bans and things that they plan on passing using executive orders specifically. So I say that to say we may not be doomed, but in order for us to not be doomed, we have to be knowledgeable and we have to be actionable as well. We can't just keep sitting and arguing with each other about all of these ideological nuances that are important and are necessary and are relevant, but maybe sometimes we take that too far and it takes us just in these constant internal spirals where we're just fighting each other instead of actually like coming together on something that we all agree with and moving towards that. And they're normalizing child labor. Yes, also that. The more autonomy you can take from children and the more that you can skew the laws in a way that makes it to where children can start working earlier and younger, especially with what they're trying to do with education. That's also a slippery slope. I'm trying to look more into that because I work in education personally. My mom works in education. So in Texas, like, I know in general, one of the ideas is they want to give more power to the states to determine what to do with education rather than having government funded, educational stuff. They want it to be left up more to the states, and they also want to impose more Christian fundamentalism, nationalism ideals into education, whatever will be left of education after that, which is not good. Not good. They also plan to erase a lot of language, especially around gender, how would you term it? Gender ideology. They're trying to erase a lot of that. They're trying to impose more um family, what do they call it? Basically nuclear family propaganda. It's going back to the 50s. Going back to the 20s and the 50s and whatever of like the traditional family values. That's what it is. So everything that's the antithesis of progress in terms of people being able to self-determine and to be authentic. So dealing with that kind of ideological battle until Jupiter moves into Pisces, and then I think it turns into um struggling to read in between the lines of what a lot of this legislation means, and what that means for us in the sense of how we perceive reality and how we perceive other people. I had a way that I was going to describe Saturn in Pisces earlier, and now I forgot, but it had something to do with like the limits of, or being limited in the way of being able to speculate or something. I can't remember what it was, but it basically being a struggle to read in between the lines. It's the first way I've thought about Saturn and Pisces this far. And I think with Jupiter and Gemini, that can pose an issue because it is a lot of people taking things at face value and moving off of that information and maybe getting stuck emotionally, or, I don't know, just getting stuck on what power they do have or don't have, or whatever the case may be at the time. And the other side of it is struggling to read in between the lines, and therefore we make an effort to learn more so that we're not just believing everything that we're being told. But it's going to be tough, guys. Like, I'm not going to hold you. It's going to be very tough, especially because of how many people, like, one thing that the right has on its side is individualism and capitalism. So regardless of all the other ideological stuff, hey HP, aside from all of the ideological stuff, like the material circumstances that people are dealing with, and capitalism very much still being alive, even if it is failing in certain ways, a lot of people have bought into that on the right and the left, which is what kind of gives right-wing propaganda even more power. And so as long as people are still stuck in individualism and still stuck in thinking capitalism is the best economic system that can exist, it's going to be very, very difficult to show that there are other ways that we can do things, and show that there are other ways that we can live in ways that are actually more sustainable and more beneficial to us on an individual and collective basis. I think it's still important to show and to model in a lot of cases that collectivism and socialism is not inherently harmful in the ways that people have been propagandized to think. But I also think that will be tricky to do in a situation where we are kind of being pitted against each other materially, because I don't see the economy getting better anytime soon, and we really might be headed towards another Great Recession, Great Depression situation. I don't want to say too much in that direction because I don't know for sure, and I don't want to just like say things and freak everybody out. But I do want it to be on your radar at the very least that like the economy is not just going to overnight recover because people think Trump is going to save the economy. You know what I mean? Or um that, even if the other conspiracies of Kamala somehow becoming the president come true, that that things would necessarily immediately become better because of that either. So we're in the pits of hell regardless. Like I said, we had two realities we were going to enter into, and we've entered into this one regardless of what happens from this point forward. So got to keep that in mind. Nicolita says, I love this perspective because even the conversation of how gender affirming operations, hair transplants, plastic surgery for cis adults is eye opening for people. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, it's way more nuanced than that. And just healthcare in general, ableism and all those types of things, people's rights, like abortion issues, all of that type of stuff affects everybody, not just the identity group that it's focused on. You know, trans people, trans men like myself still need abortion rights and still need healthcare rights in the same way that cis women do. Like, people hate to talk about it and hate to acknowledge it, but it's true. So gender is just not black and white. HP says, dare I also say people who think they are on the left are actually left of center because they measure themselves by the Democrats. For sure, for sure. Because if you are actually on the left, there's no way you'd think capitalism is working and also not mask. Yeah. You know, we feel that way over here for sure. Especially now that more people are disabled than actually realize through multiple COVID infections and anything that has happened as a result of a COVID infection. I've been talking to other menopausal women about HRT and how it's all linked. Oh my gosh, yes. Also that, like, correct me if I'm wrong because I've only looked at this once, but isn't there something about menopausal women also needing to take testosterone at times for certain reasons? Because testosterone, I don't know if you guys know, is a Schedule 1 drug. So classified Schedule 1 drug. I think it's Schedule 1. I don't know. It's scheduled drug in general. And therefore you can't just it's harder to access than other pharmaceuticals because it's so heavily policed and regulated. I don't remember why, but yeah, it's hard to access. And so it's not as easy to get as estrogen, which estrogen I don't think is necessarily that easy to get either, but it's harder to get and can be illegal to possess without a prescription. So if they further criminalize HRT, hormone replacement therapies and stuff like that, then just being caught with that prescription along with having other identities can just lead you into worse trouble than probably what you expected. Okay, so yes, women do have to take testosterone sometimes in menopause, for sure. Yeah, that's important. And then also trans people who are on trans men who are on testosterone, you can't just stop taking it cold turkey. You can kind of wean off of it and then basically detransition, but if you've been on it for a long time, going off of it can not only cause a whole bunch of psychological issues, or rather increase psychological issues that were being relieved by being on testosterone. It can also cause a lot of physiological issues too that include bone density issues and some other ones I can't think of off the top of my head, but it matters. And especially people who have had maybe hysterectomies and had their ovaries removed and things like that can't really just stop taking testosterone because there's not even any estrogen to then come back online and balance everything out in the female direction. It just gets messy. So it's not good to have those drugs to make it even more difficult for people to access hormones. Regarding the kids, the amount of policing happening feels closely linked to youth being radicalized via the internet. Well, this is true. And also, I think we underestimate how pervasive right-wing propaganda is on the internet. Right-wing propaganda on the internet is way more pervasive, in my opinion, and kind of based on the results of the election than left-wing stuff. Woke ideology is not nearly as pervasive as radical left, basically Nazi ideology and stuff like that. Because when you think about it, the resistance that exists to everything progressive is because this country was founded on bullshit. It was founded on the bullshit of white supremacy and patriarchy and those, Christian fundamentalist values. And so anytime we're starting to make progress that is kind of antagonistic to those more right-wing ideals, like, we're coming from behind with a lot of our stuff, and so it makes it harder for us to catch up then, and for our propaganda, our wokeness, whatever, which is not even what woke is, but their idea of what wokeness is, makes it even harder for it to gain traction because people just end up slipping back to that past fundamental shit. Okay, I gotta go through these quickly because I have to get off this call here in just a moment. Yes, Nicolita, same thing with abortions. They banned not just termination, but criminalized miscarriages as well because people don't realize miscarriage is characterized as an abortion. Yes, definitely look into all of the technical names for um, all different types of birth issues, basically spontaneous abortions, miscarriages, um, when babies die in utero, all of that type of stuff, evacuations, like, all of those are classified as different abortions, and it makes the legality of just doing basic medical procedures even more complicated, and sometimes you don't have time for that. You can buy my estrogen patches from my cold dead hands, absolutely. Um, Shout out to Black Girl's Guide to Menopause because I knew that because of them. Yes, absolutely. No kind of hormones should be stopped cold turkey, including birth control, because of the things you just said. Absolutely. Yes. You're absolutely correct, Winter, because the left is what it is and the right uses lanes and pipelines to get you there. They have amazing strategy. And they really do. Like, as much as we and people try to say that the Republicans are dumb, no, they are very concentrated and very disciplined in their strategy. And we are not on the left. And I think a lot of that is because we have a lot of different influences on the left in terms of, like, what we believe is the right way to move forward. And we're trying to account for and consider so many different ways of thinking that I think it's just hard for us to get organized because we're not all coming from the same place. Whereas on the right, they're all coming from the same place that has existed for centuries. So it is a lot that we're up against, and it kind of makes sense why there's so much infighting on the left whenever, like, they have been doing this. This is their bread and butter. They have been doing this forever. I think even if we were to do a historical refresher on what the American Revolution was, we would see that even that is probably not in alignment with what we actually are trying to do today. So they have a lot of systemic foundations and structures that work to their advantage, whereas we do not. And we have to keep that in mind. And that's why it's important to push for structural things that do get codified and stayed in place. But we struggle to do that because a lot of us don't even want to have the structures and the systems in place. So, yeah. It's like, hey, socialism is good. Instead of showcasing socialism as a lifestyle, they do trad wife content. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. We just talk about it. This is what I was saying too. I don't know if you were in here when I was saying this, HP, but we do a lot of ideology and theorizing on the left sometimes that just goes over people's heads and they don't see the material benefit of that. So they don't have any reason to believe why it would be better when all they're getting is propaganda from the right that socialism is bad and communism is bad and Marxism is bad, so on and so forth, when that's not necessarily the case. They just have brainwashed everybody into thinking that it is bad. I've been saying this for so long. They're very smart and very strategic. Like, yes, they have the money, but they have the strategy, and that's why things feel insurmountable, for sure. On the left, coalition doesn't really work, but on the right, they don't care as long as you subscribe to their ideals and even add people to whiteness for the plot, i.e., Irish, Italian, and Jewish people. Absolutely. Yeah. They can have, like, variation between their identities and all those types of things, beliefs on these, like, more nuanced levels. But at the end of the day, they're like, this is what we want: capitalism, whiteness, patriarchy, colonialism in a nutshell. This is what we do. And they even are on the same page within, to be like, yeah, I don't give a fuck what happens to poor white people. And even poor white people are like, yeah, I don't give a fuck what happens to my neighbor. I need to get mine. This is very, like, everybody's on the same page, regardless of class, regardless of whatever, to some extent. And so if we're not doing anything to showcase an alternative reality that they can actually immediately benefit from, why would they leave? Why would they leave? It's tricky. And of course, whenever we're talking about these things, I'm talking about these things on the level of everyday people, like especially people that we exist with on a day-to-day basis, especially like for me, someone in a red state, like I'm about to go to work with people who voted for Trump and I don't want to, but they're also not like the same extreme, Nazi type people who um we often see and hear from, Ben Shapiro and all those types of people. These are just regular everyday people who genuinely do just want things to be less expensive, and then probably have some racist undertones they haven't unpacked yet and all that type of stuff. But for the most part, they're not leading with that energy. They're just everyday people. Those are the people I'm talking about as far as people that we could reach with actual material change. But otherwise, yeah, people up at the top, they got a whole other thing going on, and I can't really speak on that because I'm mostly regurgitating all of the information that I've consumed over the past week. So anyway, I need to get ready for work. I have to be there at 1:30. So that's all I have to say for today. The first 20-25 minutes, if you just joined, was talking about the astrology forecast ish the week ahead, just talking about some of the major transits going on right now. So once I end this, if you want to go back and watch, definitely do that. If you haven't already liked the video, please like the video, subscribe to my channel so you can get notified every time that I go live. I try to give at least a 1 or 2 hour notice, so everyone has a heads up. Ooh, and this Pluto transit stuff, I'm actually looking into this. I have thoughts, but I won't get into it today. Maybe on Friday, if I come on and do live, I will let y'all know kind of what I'm thinking about Pluto, because I do actually have some thoughts, but I need to look into it a little bit more. So thank y'all so much. Hey, Karen, good to see you on the tail end as well. Thank y'all so much for being here. I will talk to you all very soon. Yeah, love you guys. Bye. Cue outro music.